Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever sat down, studied for hours, and walked away with that incredible, invincible feeling where you just know you've totally grasped the material? But then, you wake up the next day, sit down for the test or that big meeting, and you are drawing a complete and total blank. It's literally the worst, right? Psychologists actually have a name for this, the illusion of competence. It's this incredibly frustrating phenomenon where just reviewing material makes you feel like you've mastered it, when in reality, it hasn't actually embedded itself into your long-term memory at all. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're breaking down the fascinating psychology of learning. We're going to bypass those common pitfalls and look at how your brain actually encodes and absorbs information on a biological level.
For decades, society has basically treated intelligence like a genetic lottery. You know, that deeply ingrained fixed mindset, the belief that you're just dealt a certain hand at birth. We tend to think some people effortlessly pick up new skills, while the rest of us are just biologically doomed to struggle. But here's the thing. Modern neuroscience fundamentally challenges that assumption. We now know for a fact that learning is not a fixed trait. It is a dynamic, highly trainable skill. So in our time together today, we're going to explore the actual mechanics of the human brain. We'll discover how your brain physically alters its architecture to create memories, why forgetting is actually a neurological secret weapon, and the precise, science-backed techniques that can help absolutely anyone learn faster, retain more, and completely redefine their cognitive limits.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll tackle the learning illusion. Then we'll look at how your brain wires itself. After that, we dive into the science of forgetting, followed by sleep and spacing effects, the Protégé Effect, and finally, building new pathways. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The learning illusion. Now, the absolute most crucial thing to understand here is that learning isn't just about passively receiving information. It's not like you're just pouring water into a bucket. A lot of us rely on passive reading or endless highlighting, kind of hoping that if we just expose our eyeballs to a page long enough, we can cram the data in. But that approach completely ignores our biology. The brain isn't a hard drive that you just download files into. It's a living, active biological network. True learning requires active encoding. You have to chemically and structurally change the brain to hold on to a new piece of information. Cramming? Well, that might hold water in the bucket for a few hours, but it almost immediately leaks out because the underlying structure hasn't actually been changed. Which brings us to Section 2, how your brain wires. To really master a new skill, we have to zoom way in and look at the biological machinery inside your head. What is actually happening when we learn something new? Well, you've got roughly 86 billion neurons in there. 86 billion. And these aren't just stagnant little cells. They form this vast, incredibly complex interconnected network. Whenever you're learning something new, these neurons communicate by firing action potentials, basically electrical impulses, across tiny gaps called synapses. They release neurotransmitters sending chemical signals back and forth in real time. Learning is, quite literally, a physical change in your brain's architecture. Every single time you grasp a new concept, a highly specific sequence of neurons fires together, carving out a brand new electrochemical pathway in your mind. And this constant, ongoing physical rewiring is called neuroplasticity. It's your brain's ability to change its very structure by building stronger neural pathways through practice. Honestly, the easiest way to think about these neural pathways is exactly like physical muscles in your body. When you work them out, whether you're practicing Spanish, trying out a complex recipe, or learning to play the guitar, those specific synaptic connections undergo a form of hypertrophy. They physically get thicker, faster, and much more efficient. On the flip side, if you ignore a skill, those connections atrophy. You aren't just memorizing abstract facts when you study, you are actively, physically building a stronger, more specialized brain with every single repetition.
Section 3. The science of forgetting.
Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. Wait a minute. I clicked on this explainer to learn how not to forget. But we really need to look at this totally counterintuitive truth. The widespread myth is that forgetting is a fundamental flaw in our intelligence. But the reality? Forgetting is a feature, not a bug. Psychologists and neuroscientists call this synaptic pruning. Think about it. Every single day, you are bombarded with millions of data points. If you retained absolutely everything, every random license plate you drove past, every boring piece of small talk, your cognitive load would be completely maxed out. It would overwhelm your processing speed. So to protect you, your brain actively looks for connections that aren't being used and just prunes them away. It clears out the noise to optimize your mental processing power for the stuff that actually matters. Forgetting creates the necessary space for actual mastery.
Moving on to Section 4, Sleep and Spacing Effects. Let's get into some actionable hacks.
So how do we make sure our brain actually holds on to the good stuff and doesn't just prune it away? We have to work with our biology, not against it. First up is the spacing effect, which comes from what psychologists call the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Basically, information is remembered exponentially better when study sessions are spread out over time rather than crammed into one chaotic night. Why? Because chemically, your synapses need time to rest and consolidate before they're fired again. If you cram for 5 straight hours, your neurons hit a wall of diminishing returns. They literally get fatigued. But if you study for just 30 minutes across several days, you force your brain to repeatedly recall the information right as it's starting to fade. It's kind of like walking a path through a really dense forest. Walk it once, the weeds grow back by tomorrow. But if you let the weeds start to grow and then walk that exact same path again and again over a few weeks, suddenly that trail becomes clear, wide, and structurally permanent. And to make that structural permanence happen, we arrive at one of the absolute most critical insights in all of neuroscience. Sleep is the save button for your brain. In our highly caffeinated hustle culture world, so many of us sacrifice sleep to study or work longer. We think we're somehow gaining an edge. But biologically, sleep is the exact moment when learning solidifies. During the deep stages of sleep, short-term memories are actively transferred from a temporary holding area, the hippocampus, and they are securely woven into the neocortex for long-term storage. While you're snoring away, your brain is busy replaying the day's events, strengthening the important pathways, and performing that synaptic pruning we just talked about. If you don't sleep, you interrupt that entire transfer process. You are literally failing to hit the save button on the file.
Section 5. The Protégé Effect. Have you ever noticed that when you try to explain a complex concept to a friend, or maybe walk a coworker through a new piece of software, you actually end up understanding it profoundly better yourself? Psychologists call this the Protégé Effect. Just the mere expectation that you're going to have to teach information completely changes how your brain processes it. Instead of just passively reading, your brain is immediately forced into active recall. You have to synthesize the complex data, translate it into your own words, and organize it logically. And more importantly, trying to explain something immediately exposes your own blind spots. You can't just gloss over the parts you don't quite get when someone is actively asking you questions. Because of this, the most effective student in any room is almost always the one who's tasked with teaching the material to others.
So, when we combine these biological tactics, spacing out our sessions to build that forest path, prioritizing sleep to transfer data to the neocortex, and teaching the material to force active recall, we unlock one final, absolutely crucial accelerator: emotion. If you think back, you can probably vividly remember an incredibly surprising or exciting or maybe even frightening moment from 10 years ago, yet you have absolutely no idea what you had for breakfast last Tuesday. That's because emotion heavily dictates memory. When you experience a strong emotion, a little almond-shaped area of your brain called the amygdala activates and triggers a rush of dopamine. And dopamine? It acts like a chemical highlighter pen for your memory. It tags the event, basically shouting to the brain, "Hey, this matters. Do not prune this away." By deliberately connecting what you're learning to a real-world story, a deep curiosity, or a strong emotional hook, you biologically highlight that information for long-term storage.
Which brings us to our final stop. Section 6. Building new pathways.
We've traversed the biology of our neurons, the chemistry of our synapses, and the cognitive psychology of our memories. And all of this culminates in one of the most empowering frameworks in modern psychology, pioneered by researcher Carol Dweck, the growth mindset. It really all boils down to one simple, powerful reframe: my brain is still building the pathway. Because we now know that neuroplasticity is a hard biological fact, we understand that learning isn't just a measure of innate genius. Every mistake you make, every single time you struggle to grasp a complex formula, every moment of utter confusion, that is not a symptom of low intelligence. That is the literal, physical sensation of your neurons firing and attempting to wire a new connection. The struggle is the required friction for growth. So the next time you hit a wall, stop telling yourself, "I'm just not smart enough." Instead, align with the science. Just tell yourself, "My brain is still building the pathway."
You are now officially armed with the biological blueprint of your own mind. You know that to master absolutely anything, you have to actively wire the connections, space out your practice, sleep to hit save, teach to synthesize, and fully embrace the friction of growth. Which brings us to our final question for you. What new neural pathway will you start building today? Because the greatest learners aren't the ones who never struggle, they're simply the ones who understand the machinery of their own minds and relentlessly apply these science-backed techniques to keep improving. Take these tools, lean into the challenge, and go build some incredible new bridges